On this planet, there are places where human existence seems almost impossible. Just standing there is enough to send a chill down your spine. Yet some people still choose to stay. Homes cling precariously to sheer cliffs, exist in unforgiving landscapes, or are surrounded by dangers that never seem far away. Places that, by all logic, shouldn't exist, yet somehow continue to defy it. What drives people to live on that fragile line between safety and risk? And why do these extreme places continue to draw in those with a taste for exploration? Take a closer look and see just how far people are willing to go to survive here. Take a deep breath, because the first place we're stepping into seems to float among the clouds, where oxygen itself feels like a luxury. At more than 3,000 meters above sea level, Tiger's Nest clings to the sheer cliffs of the Paro Valley like a living thing. From a distance, it's almost impossible not to wonder, how did workers in the 17th century haul massive stones and heavy timber up to such an unthinkable location? This is no place for the faint of heart. There's only a single narrow trail leading up, winding along steep drops, often shrouded in mist. The altitude alone is punishing, and combined with slick, uneven stone steps, the climb becomes a true test of endurance. And yet, despite the harsh conditions, monks continue their quiet devotion here each day, undisturbed as the wind howls through the mountain passes. At the same time, thousands of travelers push themselves through hours of steep hiking, determined to reach what many call the land of spirits. It's a place that by all logic shouldn't exist, and yet it stands firm, defying gravity and time itself. No walls, no roof, no clear line between inside and out. Zhongdong Cave Village is a rare kind of living space, an entire community goining beneath a massive natural stone dome. The cave stretches across thousands of square meters, with a ceiling rising more than 50 meters high. At one point, it was home to nearly 100 residents, people who lived, studied, and carried out their daily routines entirely within this cavernous space. But its vastness doesn't make it comfortable. Light barely reaches inside. Humidity lingers year-round. The ground is often slick underfoot, and the air feels heavy, with little circulation. it's an environment that remains relentlessly harsh, despite its scale. Reaching this place is a journey in itself, one that means navigating rugged mountain roads that can turn treacherous without warning, especially when the weather shifts. There's little in the way of infrastructure, and daily life depends almost entirely on the surrounding natural conditions. It's this combination, a sealed, natural space set deep within such unforgiving terrain, that creates a striking paradox. What seems like a temporary shelter once sustained an entire community. And that same paradox is what draws curious travelers today, those eager to explore a version of home that exists far beyond anything familiar. Clinging to the edge of a sheer granite cliff above the Hueca River Gorge, the hanging houses of Cuenca appear to float in mid-air. From a distance, their wooden balconies jut boldly out over the void, creating a breathtaking and unsettling scene. It's the kind of view that makes you wonder, what has kept these 14th century structures from collapsing into the valley below? The real danger lies in time itself. Centuries of wear have tested the rock beneath them. While the dizzying drop just below the floor leaves almost no margin for error. Here, the line between solid architecture and open air is separated by little more than a thin layer of wood. Despite the harsh conditions and constant risks, this place once served as a retreat for royalty, and today remains an unmissable destination for travelers drawn to the edge of adventure. If there's a place where building a settlement seems almost impossible, it's along the steep, unforgiving slopes of the Hajjarah Mountains. And yet, Al-Hajjarah rises right out of that landscape, a bold answer to the challenge. Here, homes don't spread across flat ground. Instead, they climb upward, stacked along the mountainside. Built from stone, these structures are tall, narrow, and carefully balanced. Their design shaped by the need to hold firm against gravity. Space is scarce, carved out of the terrain itself. Every ledge, every sliver of rock is put to use. Creating a setting that feels both solid and precarious at the same time. At this altitude, powerful winds cut through the mountain passes, while dry air and constantly shifting temperatures make the environment even more unforgiving. The paths are little more than narrow, winding tracks, sometimes hugging the edge of steep drops, where every step has to be slow and deliberate. there's almost no room for error, no real sense of safe ground. Everything depends on the stability of the rock beneath your feet. Still, in conditions that seem unfit for everyday life, an entire settlement has endured over time. Proof that human resilience can take shape in ways far beyond anything we consider familiar. At just around 2,000 square meters, roughly half the size of a soccer field, Migingo Island is packed so tightly with rooftops that there's barely any open space left. Set in the middle of Lake Victoria, this rocky outcrop is as harsh as it is small. The sun beats down relentlessly during the day, strong winds sweep across the water, and the surrounding lake is in constant motion. Living space is compressed into every available square meter. Pathways are so narrow, they allow only a single person to pass, and daily life unfolds in close quarters, with everything happening side by side. Fresh water is scarce. Sanitation and basic needs depend heavily on the natural environment, and isolated in the middle of such a vast lake. Getting there isn't always easy, especially when the weather turns. Even so, this place, seemingly unfit for settlement, has supported hundreds of residents, forming a community that continues to persist against the odds. Amid the stark white mountains of Carrara, Colonnata emerges like a village trapped within the heart of marble quarries. Towering around it are sheer rock faces carved into steep, layered terraces, shaping a landscape that feels both majestic and unforgiving. The roads leading in are narrow, sharply inclined paths, coated in fine marble dust that makes every surface potentially slick underfoot. By day, sunlight reflects off the pale stone, casting a harsh, blinding glare across the entire area. While the air carries a constant haze of fine particles from quarrying activities that have persisted for centuries. Massive trucks haul blocks of stone weighing dozens of tons, moving back and forth in a constant rhythm right alongside residential areas. In a setting that seems built for industry alone, homes still find their place, wedged between cliff faces, stacked along the natural tiers of the mountainside. Daily life unfolds in the constant presence of rock, dust, and steep slopes. It's not a comfortable environment by any stretch, but it endures in its own way, a place where people don't separate themselves from the landscape, but adapt to it, living in direct balance with the world around them. Instead of breaking apart the ancient granite to build something new, the people of Monsanto chose to adapt. Shaping their lives around the mountain rather than reshaping it. The streets feel like a maze carved straight from stone, where a single massive boulder can serve as the roof of one home and the foundation of another. Some of these rocks, weighing hundreds of tons, loom overhead, pressed so tightly against the walls that there's barely any space in between. In many places, the pathways narrow to less than a meter wide, winding between towering slabs of rock. Moving through them means turning sideways, squeezing carefully through the gaps. The steep terrain makes every step a careful one, especially after rain, when the stone becomes slick and unforgiving. During the day, the rocks absorb heat, turning the space into a sweltering pocket. By evening, wind funnels through the narrow passages, sending sudden chills through the air. There's no clear boundary between home and mountain. Every structure is wedged into the landscape, forming a space that feels both enclosed and precariously balanced. And it's this very way of living, surrounded, shaped, and defined by stone, that turns this place into a kind of home unlike any other. Hidden deep in the heart of the Himalayas, Phugtal Gompa appears like a giant honeycomb. Embedded directly into the mouth of a cave shaped like a shark's jaw, high on the sheer cliffs of the Zanskar Valley. It's almost impossible to believe that a structure made from mud and timber could hold on here for more than 800 years, enduring earthquakes, relentless winds, and the brutal cold of the high mountains. There are no roads, no vehicles, only a narrow footpath tracing the edge of a steep drop, where a single misstep could mean a fall into the abyss below. When winter arrives and temperatures drop below -30 degrees Celsius, the monastery is completely cut off from the outside world for months at a time. Even so, the extreme altitude and harsh conditions are not enough to turn this place into a lifeless void. The monks continue to rely on a single source of water, trickling from the cave wall to sustain themselves, turning Phugtal into a powerful symbol of survival, life enduring against all odds, carved into barren stone. There's a kind of architecture that feels like it belongs in science fiction. Clusters of tube-like structures rising tightly together, stretching upward into open air. Ksar Ouled Soltane doesn't follow any familiar rules of construction. Instead, it's the result of pure adaptation, a response to the harsh realities of the Sahara Desert, where daytime temperatures can soar past 40 degrees Celsius, hot winds carry sand across the land, and water is always in short supply. Thick, sun-baked earthen walls act as insulation, keeping the interior cooler despite the heat outside. Entrances are small and set deep within the structure, designed to block the flow of hot air. The Gompa storage chambers are stacked in multiple levels, saving space, while also creating a natural shield to protect food from heat and intrusion. But the sense of exposure is unmistakable. Narrow open-air corridors run high above the ground, where every step hugs the wall, and the drop below is always in view. The levels are connected by steep stairways and slender passageways, forming a structure that feels both enclosed and layered at once. Built from earth, mud, and plaster, it may appear simple, but it's remarkably resilient, standing firm against the desert's extremes while safeguarding the communities that once depended on it for generations. It's not cliffs or deserts that define this place, it's the climate itself that has turned Norilsk into one of the harshest environments where people still manage to live. Deep within the Arctic Circle, the city endures winters that last up to 8 or 9 months. Temperatures regularly drop below minus 30 degrees Celsius and can plunge as low as minus 50 degrees Celsius. The ground is locked in permafrost, forcing every building to stand on deep supports to prevent collapse. Powerful winds, combined with snow and ice, can whip up sudden whiteouts, wiping out visibility in a matter of minutes. And the cold isn't the only challenge. Decades of industrial activity have heavily impacted the air, adding another layer of hardship to daily life. In winter, the polar night takes over, weeks of near-total darkness with little to no natural light. Then in summer, the opposite extreme, a sun that never sets. In conditions like these, even the simplest tasks, getting around, maintaining infrastructure, going about daily routines, become constant challenges. It's not a place most would choose to live, but it is a place that redefines what it means to survive. A single rock, a small house, a fast-moving river. The Drina river house is built on something that's simple, but everything around it tells a very different story. It stands like a fragile anchor in the middle of constant motion, perched on a lone rock just a few square meters wide. The wooden structure balances precariously, its entire foundation resting on that exposed outcrop in the rushing current. Even under normal conditions, the speed and depth of the water are enough to make anyone think twice. When flood season arrives, The river rises, the current tightens, and the sheer force of the water can sweep everything away in an instant. In fact, this structure has been wiped out more than once, only to be rebuilt again from the ground up. There's no buffer, no safe distance. The house faces the full power of the river head-on, and it's this repeated cycle of fragility and renewal that gives the place its meaning. A home that exists in a constant state of risk, always one surge away from исчезновения, yet somehow returning, again and again, to the middle of the current. A limestone pillar rising about 40 meters into the air, with a flat, narrow top. That's the entire foundation of Katskhi Pillar. Within that limited space, a small chapel and a few simple structures have been built, forming a world almost completely cut off from the ground below. The only way up is a metal ladder fixed to the rock face, climbing nearly straight verticalno, where every step demands precision and control. At that height, wind hits head-on. Weather can shift in an instant, and the rock beneath offers little sense of true security. This seemingly impossible location wasn't chosen for practicality. It traces back to the ascetic traditions of Georgian Orthodox monks centuries ago. For them, the top of the pillar was more than a place. It was a separation from the world below. This is not a space designed for everyday life, but for a life deliberately removed from it. More than 150 homes line up in a narrow stretch along a basalt ridge nearly 1 kilometer long, at points just 40 to 50 meters wide. In Castellfollit de la Roca, there's almost no space to step back. This rocky spine was formed hundreds of thousands of years ago by overlapping lava flows. As they cooled, they crystallized into vertical basalt columns, creating a near-sheer natural wall. The cliff rises almost 50 meters high, with the Fluvia and Toronel rivers below steadily eroding its base, sharpening the edge over time. On this slender strip of land, homes are forced into a single, elongated line. Many are built so close to the edge that their back walls nearly meet the drop, with windows opening out into empty space. There's no real depth to expand, no buffer for safety. Everything is compressed onto a thin ridge, where the boundary between living space and open air is always just a step away. While most cities search for solid, stable ground, Bonifacio was built right on the edge of a limestone cliff rising 70 meters above the sea. Over thousands of years, ocean erosion has hollowed out the softer rock beneath, carving deep cavities that leave the town's foundation partially undermined. From the water, the effect is striking. Rows of tall buildings jut outward into open air by 3 to 5 meters, with no visible support below. The boundary between the floors above and the drop beneath is defined only by layers of weathered rock, as the force of crashing waves travels up through the cliff into the structures above. To connect the town to the sea below, a staircase of 187 steps was carved by hand directly into the rock, angled at nearly 45 degrees. It remains a vital passageway, linking the top of the cliff to the water's edge, and standing as a testament to how far human ingenuity can go in adapting to extreme terrain. At an altitude of around 1,200 meters, completely isolated within the forests of Flores, Wae Rebo Village doesn't exist like a typical settlement. It functions more like a survival system, designed to withstand its environment. 7 towering Mbaru Niang houses, rising up to 15 meters high, are built from wood, bamboo, and natural fibers. But their true strength lies in their structure. Instead of nails, the entire framework is bound together with rattan around a central column, creating flexibility that allows the buildings to absorb strong winds and vibrations rather than break under pressure. In a climate where humidity lingers almost year-round, the thatched roofs resist decay through a natural drying system. Smoke and heat from the fire at ground level rise continuously through the upper layers. Keeping the entire structure dry and stable. Inside, the space is organized vertically. The lower level is used for daily living, while the upper levels store food and seeds. Ensuring long-term survival, the rugged terrain makes mechanized transport impossible, so everything must be carried in by hand along steep, challenging paths. Despite every limitation, life here continues, steady, uninterrupted, and deeply adapted to its surroundings. The story of Kandovan doesn't begin with construction, but with the need to hide. In the 13th century, people sought refuge in cone-shaped volcanic rocks formed from ash and lava of Mount Sahand, escaping conflict. Over time, they began carving deeper into these formations, transforming them from temporary shelters into permanent homes. Instead of building outward, everything here is created by hollowing inward. What started as small cavities gradually expanded into multi-level spaces used for living, storage, and even livestock. The porous yet thick rock acts as natural insulation, helping maintain stable temperatures despite the harsh climate outside. But living inside the mountain also means total dependence on it. Every structure exists within the stone itself. No separate foundation, no protective barrier. Here, architecture and nature don't just coexist, they merge, almost indistinguishable from one another. And what began as a temporary solution has endured for centuries, evolving into a community that still lives within the mountain to this day. In the deserts of Tunisia, Matmata reveals a form of architecture unlike almost anything else. Homes aren't built above the ground, but entirely beneath it. Instead of constructing upward, residents dig down, creating large circular pits about 7 to 10 meters deep. From above, each one looks like a hollowed-out crater, but at its center lies the heart of a home. Carved into the surrounding walls, rooms branch outward. Bedrooms, kitchens, and storage spaces all cut directly into the earth. The thick soil acts as natural insulation, keeping temperatures stable. Outside, the desert heat can climb to nearly 50 degrees Celsius. But inside these underground spaces, it remains far cooler. Typically around 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. Daily life revolves around the open courtyard at the center of each pit, where light and air filter down from above. There are no buildings rising on the surface. Everything is hidden below, connected from within. It's a way of living shaped entirely by the environment, using the earth itself as protection against the extreme conditions of the desert. "85 meters beneath the surface, Derinkuyu underground city unfolds like a buried world. Every part of daily life, from living quarters to food storage, is carved into interconnected layers of rock. The entire system was hollowed out of soft volcanic stone, forming multiple levels stacked deep underground, linked by narrow sloping passageways. What makes it truly remarkable is that life here was sustainable. A network of nearly 15,000 ventilation shafts channels air from the surface all the way down to the deepest levels, keeping oxygen in constant circulation. Because of this, even in complete isolation below ground, people could live and function within a fully enclosed environment. Inside, there were living spaces, storage areas, communal rooms, and even places of worship. The entire structure operated like a self-contained city, where every essential for survival was carefully designed to exist without natural light. Buried beneath dozens of layers of stone. The Uros floating islands are one of the few places on Earth where the ground beneath your feet isn't really ground at all. Entire islands are built from totora reeds, layered and woven together to float on the surface of Lake Titicaca. But these structures are never truly still. They shift constantly under the force of waves, strong winds, and the ever-changing conditions at nearly 3,800 meters above sea level. Homes are built lightweight, spreading out their weight to avoid sinking the surface beneath them. Yet the greatest challenge comes from below. The reeds at the base slowly decay over time, meaning the islands must be continuously reinforced and rebuilt. Life here isn't just about living, it's about maintaining the very foundation that keeps you afloat, in a place where the ground itself is always in motion. In Ganvie, there's a city of around 30,000 people where the idea of roads simply doesn't exist. The entire community is built on the waters of Lake Nokue, with stilt houses standing above the surface, supported by wooden posts driven deep into the muddy lake bed. From a distance, it looks like a vast network of homes floating across the water, completely separated from the mainland, which lies miles away. But the real challenge isn't daily life, it's the constant battle to keep the foundations intact. The wooden stilts that hold up the entire city are continuously worn down by water and microorganisms, slowly weakening over time. As a result, residents must regularly replace and reinforce them by hand to keep their homes from collapsing into the water. Every structure depends on the strength of these submerged supports, elements that are constantly changing and always at risk. Despite the instability, Ganvie continues to function as a dense, thriving community. What began as a way to escape conflict has over time evolved into a fully developed way of life, one where people accept environmental uncertainty to sustain a truly unique city on water. Pitcairn Island sits alone in the middle of the Pacific, where the map offers little more than vast stretches of blue in every direction. There's no airport, no major harbor, and no regular transportation routes. Reaching the island means days at sea, with access possible only by boat. The terrain is rugged, steep volcanic hills, broken and uneven, offering little room to expand or build. The community here is small, just a few dozen residents scattered across limited patches of livable land. Every part of daily life is shaped by the constraints of the environment. But what truly defines Pitcairn is how life is sustained. Nearly all essential goods, food, construction materials, basic supplies, depend on infrequent supply ships that may arrive weeks apart, sometimes longer. That makes storage, rationing, and careful planning a constant part of everyday living. And yet, despite the isolation and the challenges, Pitcairn has remained home to a stable community for generations. Moving at a slower, more self-contained rhythm, sustained by rare and fragile connections to the outside world. Every day, thousands of tons of waste from Cairo are brought to a district on the city's edge known as Manshiyat Naser, where daily life revolves entirely around processing this massive flow. Here, there's no clear separation between residential and industrial space. Homes sit side by side with sorting stations and recycling workshops, forming a tightly interwoven system. Trash is collected, sorted, and processed right within the neighborhood, turning every street into part of a continuous, working network. In this environment, residents work amid bacteria, fine dust, and sharp industrial debris. Conditions that are present in nearly every corner of daily life. There are no large-scale air filtration or toxin treatment systems, meaning daily life involves constant exposure to harsh environmental conditions. Even so, within this reality, a highly refined manual sorting system has emerged. With remarkable accuracy, residents are able to recover around 80% of recyclable materials from Cairo's waste, feeding them back into the production cycle. Life here becomes a constant trade-off. People live and work inside what is essentially a massive open-air processing system. In return, however, it has evolved into one of the most efficient recycling models in the world, transforming extreme conditions into a system of value that has drawn global attention. A steep hillside in Rio de Janeiro becomes the foundation for one of Brazil's most densely populated communities. Rocinha grows directly along the slope, where space doesn't spread outward. It stacks upward, layer by layer, following the natural incline. Homes press tightly against one another, forming an interwoven mass where one rooftop can double as a walkway for the level above. Narrow alleys, concrete stairways, and tight passageways replace traditional streets, turning the entire area into a continuous, three-dimensional structure. Moving through it means climbing, up steep paths and through confined spaces where everything feels compressed, close, and constantly in motion. Despite the lack of formal planning, Rocinha has continued to expand over time, evolving into a vast urban landscape clinging to the mountainside. A sheer rock formation split into two separate peaks, connected by nothing more than a narrow stone bridge. That's the foundation of Fanjingshan. But Fanjingshan is more than just a temple. It's a feat of architecture compressed onto a vertical summit, divided into two stone pillars at an elevation of over 2,300 meters. The decision to build here wasn't driven by practicality, but by spiritual belief, a place where heaven and earth are thought to meet, and where complete isolation becomes a path to clarity. The greatest challenge here comes from erosion and relentless winds, with barely any surface area to build on. Every piece of material, dating back to the 15th century, had to be carried by hand up more than 8,000 steep steps, where a single misstep could mean a fall into the void. Maintaining two temples connected by a narrow stone bridge, suspended high above the ground, is a constant defiance of gravity. It's a place where people live surrounded by dense, shifting fog and exposed to sudden storms and lightning. Choosing to exist in one of the most extreme environments imaginable. Why would anyone build a church on top of a volcanic spire that has stood dormant for millions of years? The answer lies in the human desire to turn danger into a symbol of faith. Saint-Michel d'Aiguille rises from the summit of a volcanic rock column, about 80 to 85 meters high, almost completely isolated from the surrounding ground. To reach it, visitors must climb more than 260 steps, carved directly into the stone, following a narrow, steep path upward. At the top, space is extremely limited, just enough for a small structure. The church clings tightly to the rock with no room to expand or reinforce in conventional ways. This location was never chosen for convenience. It was chosen for meaning. The more difficult the journey, the more removed the place, the more powerful it becomes as a site of pilgrimage, a place where focus and devotion are intensified. But living with that meaning comes at a cost. Strong winds, rapidly shifting weather, and the challenges of height make access, maintenance, and daily use far more complex. And yet the church has endured for centuries, standing as a testament to the lengths people will go to create spaces that rise beyond the limits of the natural world. Lichtenstein Castle reflects a very deliberate choice, prioritizing image and symbolism over construction convenience. Built in the 19th century and inspired by a novel by Wilhelm Hauff, the castle was placed right at the edge of a cliff. Rather than set back in a safer, more practical location, its pointed towers and projecting balconies reach out into open air, not for defense, but to create a dramatic visual composition in line with the romantic ideals of the time. But that choice comes with clear limitations. The buildable space is extremely restricted, and maintenance becomes far more complex due to the steep, hard-to-reach terrain. At this height, the structure is fully exposed to strong winds and shifting weather, while the natural rock beneath it is constantly shaped by erosion. Even in that context, the castle has maintained its stability, standing as a clear example of how architecture can overcome the limits of its landscape. Achieving symbolic power through careful engineering and preservation. Not every city is built from the ground up. Uplistchiki was formed in the opposite way, by carving directly into sandstone to create space from within. Thousands of years ago, people dug deep into the mountainside, shaping an interconnected network of rooms, corridors, storage areas, and even ceremonial spaces, all contained within a single mass of rock. From the outside, it barely looks like a city at all, but inside, it reveals a tightly organized, multi-level system. This method of construction offered a natural advantage. The surrounding rock helped buffer the harsh, dry climate, keeping temperatures more stable than the conditions outside. But living entirely within sandstone also comes with a cost. The structure depends completely on the material itself, one that is vulnerable to erosion. As the outer layers wear away over time, the spaces inside weaken as well, sometimes collapsing in sections. There's no outer shell, no separate foundation. Uplistchiki exists as a living system within the rock itself, one that continues to change, slowly shaped by the forces of time. Ani was once one of the most advanced cities in its region. Today, it stands as a scattering of ruins across an open plateau. Built primarily from volcanic stone, its churches and defensive walls still retain their basic form. But they no longer have any protection from the harsh environment. Strong winds, prolonged freezing conditions, and constant temperature shifts have slowly weakened the material over time. Combined with seismic activity in the area, many structures have been damaged, some collapsing piece by piece. The lack of reinforcement and maintenance over the years has only accelerated that decline. What remains isn't frozen in time. These structures are still changing, gradually worn down by the same environment they once adapted to in order to survive. Some places aren't forgotten. They're simply almost completely cut off from the rest of the world. Ouled Island is a small outcrop in the Atlantic, home to just a single house standing on a narrow strip of grass, surrounded by sheer cliffs on all sides. There are no bridges, no permanent docks. Getting there depends entirely on small boats or helicopters when the weather allows. Strong ocean winds blow nearly year-round. Dense fog rolls in without warning. Heavy waves keep the island in a constant state of inaccessibility. The thin layer of soil over volcanic rock offers no real chance for expansion, and the isolation makes even basic maintenance a challenge. In an environment that offers little support for long-term living, the presence of this lone house becomes something else entirely, a rare foothold in the middle of a harsh and unyielding ocean. In the Principality of Sealand, the idea of ground barely exists at all. The entire space is nothing more than a metal platform resting on two concrete pillars in the middle of the North Sea, fully exposed to waves and wind from every direction. Originally built as a naval fort, it was never intended for long-term living. There's no natural buffer, no transition zone. Every movement of the sea is transmitted directly into the structure itself. Access depends entirely on boats or helicopters, and only when the weather allows, which isn't often in this part of the world. Rough seas can make docking impossible. Strong winds, constant moisture, and salt exposure steadily wear down the materials. There's no natural source of fresh water, no ecosystem to rely on. Everything must be brought in from the mainland. In a place defined by isolation and continuous erosion, maintaining a human presence isn't just a challenge, it's an ongoing act of adaptation. When nature sets its harshest boundaries, people don't always turn away. Sometimes they move in. What you've just seen isn't just risk-taking. It's something more paradoxical. Homes that, by all logic, should have been erased by crashing waves, corrosive winds, or shifting ground. Yet they remain, standing alone against time. And it's that very sense of this shouldn't exist that makes these places so compelling. drawing in those who want to witness firsthand the limits of human endurance. Out of all the precarious places we've explored, which one would you most want to visit? Let us know in the comments, and if you're curious to keep exploring the world's most extreme and dangerous places, don't forget to like and subscribe for the next journey.